Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Zinat Rahman. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Politics, and it's wonderful to be with all of you this evening. We're thrilled to welcome back to campus Alfredo Corchado, who was a fellow at the IOP in 2017, Roberta Jacobson, who was a fellow at the IOP in 2018, and Roberto Velasco Alvarez, who graduated from Harris in 2017. And likewise, we're also honored to welcome Tania Guerrero and Sheriff Joe Frank Martinez. I wanted to tell you about a couple of upcoming events we have. This Thursday, I'll be sitting down for a virtual discussion with Angela Glover Blackwell, and we'll be talking about equity and multiracial democracy. Next Tuesday, we'll be back in person for a program featuring some of Illinois' rising Black leaders in government. And next Wednesday, we'll be hosting a discussion focused on balancing public safety with civil rights, and U.S. Representative Karen Bass will be joining us for that discussion. As always, you can find out more about all of this stuff, all of our upcoming events, by registering for our newsletter. And now to formally introduce our speakers is Jackie Rosa. Jackie's a fourth year in the college, and she's co-chair of IOP's Student Advisory Board. Please join me in welcoming Jackie to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the Institute of Politics for our speakers event, Human Costs of U.S. Immigration Policy at the Southern Border. My name is Jackie Rosa. I'm a fourth year in the college studying political science, history, and human rights, and I'm from Palmyra, Wisconsin. I am honored to introduce you to our accomplished panelist and moderator tonight. We'll be having a timely conversation about the current state of immigration policy, the U.S.-Mexican border, and its effects on migrants, local officials, and nonprofit organizations in the region. Our panel of guests include Roberto Velasco Alvarez, Tania Guerrero, Roberta Jacobson, and Joe Frank Martinez. Roberto Velasco Alvarez, who is an alumnus of UChicago's very own Harris School of Public Policy, is the chief officer for the North America unit at the Mexican Secretariat of Foreign Affairs. Tania Guerrero serves as an advocacy attorney focusing on policy and outreach for the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, also known as CLINIC. Returning to the IOP, former Pritzker Fellow Roberta Jacobson was the U.S. Ambassador to Mexico from 2016 to 2018, Senior Advisor at the Albright Stonebridge Group, and most recently served as Special Assistant to President Joe Biden and the Coordinator for the Southwest Border on the National Security Council. Our last panelist, Joe Frank Martinez, is the Sheriff of Valverde County in Texas. Our moderator for tonight's event is another former Pritzker Fellow, Alfredo Corchado, the Mexico City Bureau Chief for the Dallas Morning News, and he is the author of Midnight in Mexico and Homelands. Thank you for all making it out to Chicago tonight, presumably for much nicer weather. Let's give a warm welcome to our guests. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's indeed a pleasure to be back at the University of Chicago at the IOP program. It's also the place where I met Roberto Velasco in 2017. Had no idea we would come back, him and his new capacity. For the next 45 minutes or so, we will examine the ultimate human costs of immigration policy at the U.S.-Mexico border and the dire consequences, the dangerous rhetoric, the widening divisions and polarization that's going across the country on display at the border. Recently, the National Butterfly Center, located at the Rio Grande Valley at the tip of Texas, closed its doors after facing threats from the far right. The center had opposed the construction of a border barrier on its land, arguing that it would disrupt the natural habitat and hurt the migrating butterflies. Proponents for the We Build the Wall accused the Butterfly Center of supporting human trafficking, a false claim. In making the announcement, the center said it was concerned about becoming yet another target like the one that led to the Walmart shooting in El Paso. On August 3rd, 2019, a young white man from North Texas drove 650 miles to El Paso to kill Mexicans, his words, to stop, quote, the Hispanic invasion of Texas. A reminder of past militarization efforts and how Mexicans and Mexican Americans have been targets. 23 people that morning who were shopping at Walmart were killed and dozens more injured. Words do have consequences. These are just some of the examples of how political rhetoric and the divisive climate is affecting life along the border. These are the fears that I hear constantly as I report up and down the U.S.-Mexico border, fear of conspiracies that may lead to more deaths. They say journalists are only as good as their trustworthy, knowledgeable, and insightful sources to best inform the public. I'm lucky to know some of the best. And so I'm just going to get right to it. We're going to have a discussion for about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll take your questions. And I'd like to start up with a question for Sheriff Joe Frank Martinez in Del Rio. Let's start with you in Texas, which has become the epicenter of the GOP fight with the Biden administration's immigration policies, calling them, among other things, open border policies. Your stretch of the border in Valverde County has become one of the busiest corridors for migrants. I last visited the sheriff I think it was April, and most of the people coming across were Venezolanos. I think we all remember the thousands of Haitians under the International Bridge waiting to cross into Del Rio. Last year, Sheriff, if I'm not mistaken, you had a record number, 192,000 encounters versus 27,000 in 2020. So let's start off, Sheriff. Let's dispel some of the myths about the border. What are the realities? What are the myths about the place you and your family call home?
Thank you for having me. So Valverde County, just to give you a little background on Valverde County shares 110 miles of border with the Mexican state of Coahuila. Valverde County consists of 3,200 square miles. There's about a little over 48,000 residents that live in Valverde County, and I consider our county a very safe community. Last February, we started with the influx of immigrants coming to our county, through our county. The fiscal year number that ended up coming through this sector was 259,000 immigrants that came through. The incident that took place here in September, those 17 days underneath the bridge, there was approximately 17,000 Haitians that came through. So all in all, Valverde County is a very, very safe community. It's probably safer than a lot of communities throughout the country. And that's a credit to our federal and state partners that help us maintain the safety in our community. On the law enforcement side, I have 22 deputies assigned to patrol those 3,200 square miles. You divide that by 4 different shifts and days off and everything. So, generally I have 3 to 4 deputies patrolling those 3,200 square miles. So that's a lot of territory to cover and to keep safe. But with the help of our federal partners and our state partners, that's what keeps our community safe.
So when the governor portrays it as a dangerous place where you need operations of the National Guard to go there, I mean, how does that square what you see, what you know on the border itself in your county?
Well, in my county, prior to the immigrant crisis that we encountered, we were able to handle through our federal partners and our state partners and maintain our community in a safe manner. When all the influx of people started coming in, I welcomed the National Guard. I welcomed the Texas Department of Public Safety into our community to assist our federal partners who were basically, they were overtasked. They didn't have enough manpower to be able to accomplish their job. So basically, agents were taken off the line and they were handling processing, detention, and care for all these individuals that came across. So that put at risk an open border. And I'll give you an example, from Lake Amistad, which is just right outside city limits of Del Rio, all the way to the county line. We have 84 miles of river border with Mexico, very rural area. So any given day, you have 8 to 12 Border Patrol agents work in that area. So when they're all tasked to pull in, to process, and to detain, and to care for individuals, that leaves nobody out there. So in order for me to keep my citizens safe, and that's my primary responsibility, keep my citizens safe, I welcomed the extra resources that came into our county.
Thank you, Sheriff. Roberta, fellow IOP, someone I've known for many, many years, the foremost expert on Latin America. You had a first-hand look at the Biden administration, especially the 100 days. You came in, you said, I'm going to be there for 100 days. You were part of the transition. You worked in the campaign. When the Biden administration says that the Trump administration left the asylum system in such a mess that it had to dismantle it from ground up, tell us how bad the situation was. What were the policies that the Biden presidency wanted to reverse immediately, and where did you hit the brick wall?
Well, thank you, Alfredo. It's great to be with you and to be with my former colleague and wonderful partner when I worked on these issues in the Biden administration, Roberto Velasco. I think one of the things that is really important to understand is just how broken our immigration system is, sort of from the bottom up. And to be fair, it has been for a very long time. And repeated administrations have either tried and failed or not tried to fix the immigration system. And in particular, I think one of the systems that we're talking about is the asylum system, which, really, in some respects, needs to be fixed first because you're trying to protect people who are fleeing persecution in their home countries. When the Biden administration came into office, and I think it's important for everybody to understand that I'm not a member of the administration anymore. I don't speak for the administration, but I did work those first 100 days. I did work at the State Department on the transition team. What they found was a situation in which, number one, there were no documents turned over from the White House's perspective. Some of the agencies had documentation that was turned over so that we could look at what the situation was on the ground. And number two, you had some of the most draconian policies that had been implemented by the Trump administration were either reversed on day one or reversed early, right? The President Biden sent an immigration reform bill to Congress on day one, and there were other measures that were taken on day one in terms of travel bans, in terms of the remain in Mexico or migrant protection protocols that were lifted immediately. But there were two other things that were critical in this process. One is that I think it's important to understand that there are executive decrees, executive orders, executive actions that can be overturned almost immediately, some of the policies that the Trump administration put into place. But the reform of the system, the reform of both the asylum system and the reform of our immigration system writ large and comprehensive immigration reform takes much, much longer. And the administration found itself, or finds itself, it seems to me, stuck between lifting some of the measures that were implemented by President Trump during his administration and being, months or even years until they can implement even some of the executive actions that would rebuild the immigration system. For example, some of the ideas that the administration was working on, whether they were to have asylum officers do more of the adjudication at the border, or to ensure that you had a dedicated docket for the most recent border crosser so that you wouldn't have this huge backlog building up and every case going to court. Those things have taken months to try and put in place, even through executive rules. So you're in this gap between actions taken at the very beginning of the administration and rebuilding that takes much longer. And that is not a good place to be, because obviously migrants continue to come. And I think the administration was prepared for a surge of migrants as they released some of the most onerous of the previous government's policies. But what I don't think they necessarily fully understood was that in an era of COVID, when your shelters and other facilities, CBP facilities, border crossing facilities, could only safely, for health reasons, could only safely house 1/4 to 1/3 the normal number that they might be able to accommodate. You had a situation in which you were obviously quickly overwhelmed by the numbers, and you have a very slow process to try and make sure that you've got sufficient housing and accommodation and COVID testing and et cetera, and reuniting unaccompanied minors with their families. So I think that the administration was left both with very little on paper to know what the actual situation was, how many people were deployed, where they were deployed, where the migrants were crossing. But they also were left with a situation in which I would say most of the career civil servants who worked in many of these agencies, really fine people trying to do a very tough job, whether it's inspectors or Border Patrol or ICE or others. Most of those people had effectively been told to shut up for 4 years. They were given their instructions by the White House, and there was not really a normal governmental procedure for making decisions. And it took quite a while to encourage those career civil servants, those Border Patrol agents, those CBP officers and others to come back to the table and convey to us what they saw on the ground, what they thought should be done, and how we could work to get those things done in a humane and efficient manner. And it was really difficult at the beginning of this administration to encourage people to go back to speaking up. And these were some of the experts on the ground. But I guess one other thing I would say was that Sheriff Martinez really points out a critical part of this, which is local officials on the ground. Some of the most important conversations in early days that I was part of were with mayors, were with the NGOs who were operating on the ground, and indeed with local law enforcement agencies. And they bore the brunt of this, unfortunately, because while federal officials could come in and could help, I think the sheriff's absolutely right. Too many people had to process because they were overwhelmed with numbers, and because we know that by law, unaccompanied minors should not or be kept in CBP holding facilities for more than a certain amount of time. And so we had the most amazing partnerships with NGOs across the border and with local officials, and they were the ones who needed our help the most.
I'm just wondering, Ambassador, did the Biden administration underestimate the huge numbers of people who try to come in? I remember our inauguration day. By that evening, there were already emails coming out from the city of El Paso and other cities along the border saying, you know, we're concerned about what's to come next. Monday morning quarterbacking, looking back, did the Biden administration underestimate those numbers?
Well, I think the first thing that I should say is Monday morning quarterbacking is always a lot easier than playing the game on Sunday, frankly. I think the administration was very clear on understanding that there would be, from pent-up demand, there would be a surge. Knowing exactly how large that surge would be, understanding fully what the COVID protocols were going to require and how that meant that facilities that, used to hold X amount of people could now hold only 1/4 of X. I'm not sure that was fully recognized as much as it should be. But I would also note that the numbers began going up very steadily before the inauguration. And even before the election. So what you had was a trend that was already heading up. And then, of course, you had a lot of different things, one of which may have been COVID, but another of which was, and administration officials knew this from the past, disinformation and misinformation pervade throughout the sending countries by criminal organizations and traffickers who were telling people the border is open, now is your time, you need to go quickly. And so that, of course, you try and get out a message that counteracts that. But to be quite honest, it is always difficult to have those official voices coming out saying the border is not open when you've got criminal organizations and traffickers and coyotes who are saying, no, now is the time, you really need to go.
Roberto, Mexico has bear brunt of the immigration issue. I mean, it's the southern border, the northern border. The numbers have just skyrocketed over the last few years. How do you respond to critics who say that Mexico is doing the dirty work for the United States?
Well, the first thing I would say, and let me just thank you for the invitation before getting into the weeds of this, and say that this is an issue where I had the pleasure of working with Roberta. And the reality is that, I mean, it's a simplistic view, and I wish it was as simple as someone deciding to do one thing or another, and you know, good and bad people, and right and wrong. The reality is that it's a very complex issue that has several moving pieces, that has several factors. We've talked about this many times in the past, Alfredo, and from my point of view, from the point of view of the Mexican government, there are three main drivers of the phenomenon of the migration challenges that we're facing. Obviously, one has to do with the push factors in the countries of origin of the people. And Roberta was talking about the numbers and all these pressures, and in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of an economic crisis of huge proportions in many countries of Latin America and other places of the world. Just look at the case of Haiti, for example, the size of the challenges that they're facing economically, socially, politically. And you take a look at all of that, and after these years working in this issue, my first comment would be that I would be surprised if the numbers weren't going up, because there's obviously a need for many people to improve their economic conditions. They are looking for ways in which to support their families, to support their communities. And there's obviously going to be a lot of people who are going to try to migrate north. The second factor that is important, I mean, there's also a pull factor here in the United States. The fact that the vaccination process in the world was so unequal, the fact that the U.S. is having an economic reactivation that is, working well, and that is requiring workers, and that is, creating all these opportunities for people, is also going to be a big driver in this situation, and will continue to be a big driver.
We'll get to that, but I mean, Mexico doesn't have to take MPP people back. And yet,
let me get to the third factor,
that, yeah.
Which is exactly what the three countries do in terms of the transit regulations, the enforcement of our own laws. And the fact is that no country cannot have a migration policy. I mean, it's how we're organized as societies, as countries. We cannot simply say, well, we're not going to have borders anymore. Well, maybe that would be an ideal world, but the fact is that is not how we're organized as societies, and it's very difficult for any country to take a gigantic influx of people without that creating, obviously, anxiety and creating problems, because obviously people have needs, and you need to attend to those needs. So the fact is that we are all working in how to attend these three factors, and Mexico has been, for example, pushing for development programs, cooperation for development programs to attend to the push factors. We've also been working with the United States to see how we can attend and how we can improve the pull factors, so we can have a flow that is orderly, that is secure, that happens within the legal pathways that we establish. And also, we have been working to do the best that we can in terms of the enforcement of our migration laws and policies. what is the challenge there? And that goes to the core of your question. Well, firstly, that a big chunk of migration, of irregular migration, of undocumented migration, doesn't happen, spontaneously. It is organized by human smugglers, by human traffickers, by the organized crime, and that creates a very big set of challenges. For example, what we saw in Mexico in the last months of last year, that people are putting people in these freight trucks, and then obviously you have this big chance of having an accident, a really tragic accident, as it happened last year. So we do have to have an enforcement side of our own policies. We do have to apply the laws of our countries, and obviously we try to do that all the time in a way that is more supportive of people, that takes into account the human rights of people. But the fact is that it's a really complex challenge, and I wouldn't call it a problem, because it's a reality that we have to manage. But it is highly complex. It requires the coordination of several countries. And I believe that most of us are working in good faith. And I see every day, a lot of people trying to make this in a better way in Mexico, in the United States, and obviously in many other places. But it is a very significant challenge that unfortunately has no easy answers, and has, nothing as simple and as easy as saying, well, there are bad people and good people here. It's way more complex than that.
Tanya, Roberto brings up a good point. Absent of any immigration reform, at the end, immigrants become much more vulnerable. They face much more dangerous situations. Mexicans are left in limbo at the border. They become easy prey for organized crime. It almost seems like the Congress is exporting its problem to organized crime to let them resolve the issue. I was wondering if you could maybe talk to us about some of the stories that you faced over the years on the border in places like Ciudad Juarez, places like Monterrey.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, the University of Chicago, IOP, and Alfredo for the invitation. There is an externalization of the moral and legal obligation that the U.S. government has when you push your responsibility on another country, and that country doesn't step up to the plate either. Both sides of the border has issues, have challenges, have abuses, and the asylum seekers and migrants that are walking in this journey and face these challenges are the ones directly affected. When we talk about, I like to specify asylum seekers and migrants, because when we talk about migrants in general, we forget that we are not dealing with the same population that we were dealing with over 15 years ago, right? Before, it was majorly the economic migrant, and it was a single male adult, right? And now we're dealing with families, and these families are actually fleeing due to persecution, due to extreme levels of violence. And not only from the Northern Triangle of Central America, not only from South America, but from Mexico itself, from the southern part of Mexico, different parts of Mexico, due to organized crime, due to the massacres, due to low-intensity warfare that we experience, some survive in Mexico. So, some of the stories that I hear I've spent 2 years in Ciudad Juarez, and some of the stories that I've heard is a woman from Michoacan saying, I've been in Ciudad Juarez for a year and a half, and I've been trying to seek asylum in the United States because they're looking for me, they meaning organized crime, and I can't get through. I'm trying to do things right, and I can't do it, right? This is the effect of Title 42, and how the U.S.
Explain real quick what Title 42 is.
So Title 42 is a policy that was implemented in March of 2020 by the previous administration, and uses COVID as an excuse to shut down the U.S. border, basically, for me as an asylum seeker to not be able to seek asylum. And it is still in place. The Biden administration continues to uphold this policy, despite public health officials saying that it is not needed, it is not required, it is not justified to block seeking asylum in this manner. So when we talk about how there are challenges and there's no good or bad person or administration, it's just that we do not continue a narrative that does not prioritize deterrence and that does not see the needs of this demographic that is not only an economic migrant, but it is a person, it is a family that's seeking protection due to, another example would be a Salvadoran family member, a single mom, one son, minor, and she was fleeing because her partner was killed by gangs because he became an informant for the state. And the state no longer protected her or her child, and both the state and the gang was after her because of the information her partner shared. During her trip from Salvador to the southern border of the United States, she was raped, she was kidnapped twice, and she was feared for her life the entire time. When I met her in 2019, and she was in Casa del Migrante in Ciudad Juárez. And I moved her I moved her to another place because we were scared because she was receiving too many texts. And a few days after we moved her to another location, we had people from Casa Migrante tell us that there was SUVs, there was people looking for her, and it seemed like they were foreigners. So it's real. Persecution is real. And having people stuck on the Mexican side of border towns that are already riddled with violence and underfunded public service, like medical hospitals and whatnot, it's just a nest. It's like, putting wood into a fire.
Roberto, let's talk a little bit, if we can, about solutions. I know in the past you talked about perhaps part of the solution is creating more temporary programs in the United States. I mean, we have a huge labor shortage in the U.S. There's a need for more workers. Where are we at? And same question to you, Roberto.
And let me, get a little bit to what Tanya said. I mean, of course there are asylum seekers and refugee seekers in this flow, but there are also many economic migrants that are coming using the asylum system and the refugee system. And the main problem is that when the numbers of people become so great, this system becomes unmanageable and unsustainable. And you cannot process the actual asylum seekers and the refugee seekers because you have a volume of people that is simply unmanageable. I mean, we've lived through that in Mexico in the past year as well. We have hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers now in Mexico, refugee seekers in Mexico. Our system, which is called COMAR, is completely overburdened, and we don't have a capacity anymore to actually solve these cases and look to the people who actually has a need for protection and give them that protection. So coming back to the solutions part, I mean, the reality is that we all need to look for ways to have a mobility that happens differently. The first part is how can we take some of the success examples that we have. Look at the Mexican agricultural workers in the United States. A big part of that flow happened in a way that was without documents regularly in the past. And then the United States implemented the H-2A visa program, and now almost 200,000 Mexican temporary workers come to the United States during the season crops. The crop season, sorry. So that's an example of a successful policy that we can implement in other sectors. We need to create circular mobility programs, temporary worker programs that allow for people to come and to look for these opportunities to have an income and to take it back to their communities of origin. That's a big part of what we need to do and of the solutions. And then we can actually separate one sort of migrant from the other migrants that are looking for protection from persecution, which is still, at least from some countries, it's a minority of who are coming. And then the other part, if we don't do a substantial effort to improve the conditions in some of these countries, whatever we do is going to be insufficient to actually look at this flow. Because the fact is that if you have countries where you have significant security problems, you have significant economic problems, and then you have still social problems and groups that are actually facing persecution from the state or from particular groups, well, that is going to create a huge pressure that no matter what we do, there will be a very substantial number of people that are going to try to come, even if it puts them in a lot of danger. And that's another part that we need to redesign.
I mean, at the beginning of the administration, the focus was on Central America. But it's Ecuador, it's Haiti, it's Venezuela, it's Nicaragua. I mean, where do you focus those resources for economic development?
Well, I mean, we still believe, and that is a fact, that a lot of the flow is coming from Central America, so that is still a big area of our focus. Of course, the pandemic has brought a lot of economic hardship in several countries, and that's why one of the things that we said since the beginning is, if we don't work with the international community to have a vaccination process that works in a universal manner, this is going to create a lot of hardship for everyone, because then you have situations where some countries are recovering and some other countries are still in the middle of a really intense pandemic.
We keep talking about other countries, and Roberta, I'll go to you right after this, but we keep talking about other countries, Central America, South America, Haiti, but in reality, Mexico lately, unfortunately, has had many displaced people because of the insecurity situation across the country. And yet you see the administration of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, I mean, focusing the National Guard so much on immigration. I mean, how concerned is the administration about the insecurity that Mexicans are increasingly facing today?
Well, it's the main challenge that we face as a country, and it's obviously the main priority of the government. It's another really complex issue that would require a conversation on itself, but it's a big area of focus of the government. And the strategy that this government is following is to look at violence and insecurity as an issue that requires a holistic approach, that requires not only a punitive set of measures, but requires also social development measures, that requires particularly developing opportunities for young people who are disproportionately being recruited and then affected by this violence. So sort of that is what this administration has been trying to do, to create social programs for the younger generation and do all this set of measures. But of course, it's an issue that we're still battling with and will remain the main challenge of this administration and the next ones. It's a really difficult situation, particularly in some states of our country.
Roberta, we're desperate for solutions. And I just want to tell you guys, we're about 4 minutes from questions, so get the questions ready.
Well, I think, I think there are a number of things that the U.S. administration is focusing on with partners. Roberto mentioned the H-2A program for agricultural workers. H-2A has no caps. So the ability to encourage more Central American or Northern Triangle migrants to come through the H-2A program would be very welcome, I think. But I think we have to remember that H-2A and the numbers that are somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 Mexicans every year, that took a long time to develop, because these are programs that are driven by the employers in the United States, right? And so to set that up and to expand it to Central America, you've got to get agricultural producers to begin to develop the relationships with individual areas in Central America and the Northern Triangle in particular, such that they would take workers from that area year after year, the way it is true that it's done now in Mexico. H-2B, which are non-agricultural, low-skilled workers. The administration did increase the numbers of H-2Bs from the levels during Trump. And they specified that some 6,000 or 8,000 of those would need to be coming from the Northern Triangle. But that's a process that's employer driven. The government can say, this is what we want to do, we're increasing numbers, but they can't make employers come to an area they haven't hired people from before. So it's going to take longer than you'd like to create those programs. I think one of the most important things that you need to focus on with our Mexican colleagues and the countries of Central America, focusing just on that for a minute, is ways to migrate to the United States legally that are accessible in their home countries so that they don't need to travel to the U.S. border. So that includes migrant processing centers in Central America that would be able to begin the adjudication process for asylum seekers, finding them someplace safe in country while they process before they would be able to come to the United States. It also includes, obviously, the administration's attack on the root causes of migration in Central America. And that includes, and we need to focus on this, climate change driven environmental disasters, because that's part of the problem as well. And the third thing I would say that you need to focus on is internally displaced. We know that most migrants who come to the United States, or even who cross the border into Mexico from their home countries, most of them have moved at least twice, if not more, in their home countries. So is there a way that you can do much more on internally displaced, resettling people in their home countries, giving them economic opportunities, places that would be safer for them without them having to cross an international border to seek safety? The final thing I would note is that, ironically, both the U.S. and Mexico are graying societies. We are getting older. Demographically, we know that migration from Mexico was reduced for a number of years because there weren't as many people in the sort of 18 to 35 year age range that came to the United States without documents. Obviously, that's been a different situation more recently, both due to violence and due to pandemic economic dislocation. But there's still a youth bulge in Central America. Now, somewhere around 10 years, a little more from now, that will begin to ebb in Central America as well. And I'm not arguing that you can do nothing in the meantime. You must, and you must actually address this issue. But I also think that it's important to distinguish asylum seekers and refugees from economic migrants, because the law really does not give economic migrants the right to stay if they're coming in an undocumented status. The law does give you the right to seek asylum. And we need to get back to the ability of people to ask for asylum if that's the route they want to take at the border, at ports of entry, not between ports of entry. And that's the way this will become more regularized. But we also need to understand that part of the reason everybody seeks to get into the asylum sort of process is because there are no other ways to come to the United States right now. The programs for legal migration, H-2A, H-2B, and others, have not been responsive to the needs either of the U.S. economy or of those who want to leave their home country. So I think we need to deal with both creating more legal pathways for people to come to the U.S. and making much more rapid the asylum adjudication, so that people, if they are rejected, they need to know that and they're returned to their home country. If they're accepted, they need to get the benefits of that system much more quickly.
Sheriff, would that make your job easier, more temporary programs? That would make the border not so much the piñata. I mean, we are in 2022, midterm elections. The piñata will be an even bigger piñata this year, the border will. What keeps you up at night?
You know, Alfredo, everybody here makes an excellent argument. If this was left to simple-minded people to fix, it could be fixed. But, you know, Ms. Jacobson is correct. The system has been broken for years, and neither side wants the system fixed. We will continue to have these issues unless somebody does something, that there's a policy in place that allows for legal migration into the United States. We will continue to see these issues. And keeping up with what's going on here currently, you know, the number that came across in 2021 superseded the total number of apprehensions for the previous 9 years, okay? Right now, we're on pace to exceed the 2021 numbers at the southwest border. So, you know, the system needs to be fixed. Everybody's playing between the 40-yard lines, and nobody's ever going to score a touchdown if they don't work to fix the system. And at the same time, you know, people are dying. Here in Valverde County, we had 12 drownings in 2021. We had 6 drownings to elements. We had 9 deaths in traffic-related accidents. We had one that was in custody, who had a medical event just down the road from us, Brooks County. Our Sheriff Martinez up there, no relation. He had, in 2021, he had 119 deaths in his county that are investigated by the Sheriff's Office. So right now he's for 2022, in these, you know, month and a half, he's already got 9. And his his high time or peak time is the summer months. So while people are, whatever administration's in place, while they're, you know, they're not developing a process, you know, people are dying, you know, on a daily basis along the southwest border. You know, people that, you know, want to come to this country to better themselves, that are seeking protection, and, you know, and everybody, I've heard everybody's argument, and, you know, they're all valid. They're all valid. It's just finding the people in the right place. The core number of people in the middle, those are the people that are going to solve something. And, you know, it's sad that we can't get there.
Thank you, Sheriff. Any questions? Yes.
Las luces.
Se me matan.
Hello, thank you for being here. My name's Ernesto Trucchi. I'm also a Harris student, so I appreciate you coming. My question for you would be, perhaps it's more directed at Roberto, but feel free to chime in. I know that some months ago, the Trump administration put some pressure on Mexico, and we had some, you know, more hardline policies on our southern border to try to, I don't know, stop or make it harder for migrants to come in from Central America. My question is that still our current policy? And if so, is it something that Mexico should continue? Is that a temporary solution to the problem to try to stop it? Or if not, what are other things that Mexico should be doing?
And let me just add, has it been easier working with the Biden administration than the Trump administration? He's a diplomat. I don't think
It was easy working with Roberta, but unfortunately she left. But we had some very interesting conversations always, and she's very smart. Well, first, yes, of course we had a big crisis with the Trump administration because of another migratory crisis that we had in 2019. Coming mainly from the northern triangle of Central America, or the north of Central America, because they don't like this northern triangle thing. So let's just say Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. And that led us into a very difficult situation with the then president and his team, where we faced this threat of tariffs. And we had to go to Washington and have these obviously difficult conversations on how to deal with what was happening. There were a series of things that resulted from that series of conversations. For example, the implementation in all of the border of what was called back then, and now it's still being implemented as the Migration Protection Protocols, which is a name that in Mexico we prefer to say the implementation of Section 235B2C of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Also, Mexico accelerated the deployment of our National Guard in the South. Since the National Guard was created, before any of these crises with the Trump administration happened, it was established by Congress in the law that created the National Guard that one of its purposes was to help the migration authorities, because we don't have anything like CBP. We have a migration institute that has an administrative role, but not a law enforcement role. They are unarmed. They don't have any of the sort of law enforcement functions that CBP does. So the National Guard supports the Migration Institute on this task. And as long as our migration laws don't change, I mean, and the National Guard law doesn't change, I mean, that is the policy that we will keep implementing. And it's not just because of pressure of the White House that was done. It has to do also with the implementation of our own law. It has to do with the control of our southern border, not for migration, but in general, because it's an area of the country where we have other threats and other challenges. So that was why the National Guard was put there. A big part of what we saw during that crisis, and we still see it today, is what I mentioned before, that the organized crime and all these networks of human smugglers are putting people in great risks and are organizing a lot of these crossings across Mexico. So a part of what the National Guard has been doing, and together with other authorities in Mexico, is to try to dismantle these organizations. I mean, I have always said this before the accident happened last year, but no one can see 500 people inside a freight truck and claim that that has anything to do with human rights. Those people are at a complete vulnerability situation and a complete risk, and that is part of what we've been trying to do. Of course, we know that we still have other significant challenges in our own policy, and we want to change, for example, our visa policies and how we look at economic migration ourselves, because we do have a lot of migration as well to our own country. We're also continuously looking how to improve our refugee and asylum system, which has been put on all this strain because of what has happened in the last few years. And then the other part, which is what you mentioned with the MPP and the Title 42 and the like, well, what we've done is that we've tried to work with the United States in a collaborative and in a way that, takes into account the fact that, well, the U.S. has a migration policy. We are dealing with a flow that is unprecedented and that puts everyone under a lot of strain. And we've tried to look for ways to attend in the most responsible way that we can that situation. For example, I mean, we created these shelters in the north of Mexico, in Tijuana, Ciudad Juárez, and we're creating a third one in the Tamaulipas region. And we've tried to do a lot of things, but the fact is that this remains a very big challenge, and Roberta knows very well that there are no easy solutions. I mean, Title 42 was created during the past administration, or implemented during the past administration, but the fact is that the situation is still so complex that as long as, as much as we would like to not have this in place, it's not possible to lift it right now. Why? Roberta mentioned the capacity, for example, constraints in all of the northern borders, so it's been also a way of sharing this problem. There's also another issue that I would bring to everyone's attention. I mean, We keep talking about these numbers that Joe mentioned, but the fact is that these numbers are completely distorted by Title 42. The numbers that CBP reports every month are not numbers of migrants, are numbers of apprehensions or encounters at the border, and those numbers have been distorted by Title 42 because it has created this, recidivism and this sort of circular attempt.
Are they inflated by 3%, 4 times, 3 times?
Around 30%.
Around 30%.
So the numbers are inflated around 30%, which is, not a negligible number. But the fact is that we are all trying every day to take a look into how we can make this more humane, more respectful, but we don't have the solutions in place right now to change completely these policies, unfortunately.
Yeah, we have another question.
See if I can fix this. Hi, my name is Emily Barnett, and I'm a first-year grad student at the Harris School of Public Policy. I wanted to ask a question about unaccompanied minors because I feel like this topic is often very confusing in the media. Parts of the story are left out. It's very confusing who they are, how they arrive at the border, and what happens to them afterwards. And because of some of this confusion, it's made it a very contentious issue here in Chicago, as there are organizations that have reunification specialists, and I think a lot of people are confused, like what's happening in their own backyards. And so I was wondering if you could elaborate on I guess that the whole process and what happens to these children once they enter the care of Health and Human Services.
Tanya?
Sure. I'm going to give you an example, Emily, right? I want to give you an example of a 14-year-old girl who I met in August of last year. She is from Michoacan. She was kidnapped. She was raped by several people from the cartel, and the family paid a great deal of money and did not let her go. And she had an 8-month-old baby. She finally found a way to escape, which was torment. But she was able to. She was alive, and the baby was too. And one of her godmother, she was able to contact her godmother secretly, and the godmother paid for a bus to send her up, far away, anywhere. And she was able to get to Juarez. She got to Juarez, a 14-year-old girl got to Juarez on her own with an 8-month-old baby, and stood on an international bridge, which is not easy to cross because there's Mexican officials who don't let you in. National Guard is basically a soldier, is militarized 100%. It's very intimidating, especially when you're 14 and you've gone through hell. And so she was very brave, and she stood in front of a CBP officer and said, "I cannot go back home. I need you to help me." And the CBP officer said, "There's no asylum today. The office is closed. Go back." And she tried her best. She wasn't heard. She was sent back. And somebody found her on the street, and they took her to a Catholic shelter called Casa Migrante in Ciudad Juarez. And that's where I met her. And right there in that piece of story, there were several illegal things that happened on the Mexican side and on the US side, right? So an unaccompanied minor should never be turned away. And in parentheses, nobody seeking asylum should be turned away at the border, right? So she was, despite the fact that they knew that she was Mexican and that she was a minor. I spoke to CBP. I had to explain the situation to them. I had to accompany her physically to the port of entry, and I had to stand with her for over an hour with her baby in the sun of August, in the middle of the desert, by the way, which is not fun. And finally, we were able to have her accepted into the US, processed. And because she's unaccompanied, and she's a minor, she was put into custody, and she cannot be in custody for over 72 hours. So she was tested for COVID, and she was detained for a while, and then they sent her to a shelter. And ORR, which is the Office of Resettlement and HHS, get involved. And she's with them for a period of time while a sponsor or a family member contacts them. Usually this is a direct family member, which is mom or dad or uncle, cousin, brother, or somebody. In her case, she had no family in the US. She had like a friend of the family. And so the process would be longer because this is not a direct, for the well-being of the child, they need to go through a process to make sure that this person isn't going to be put in harm, you're not placing this child in harm. And so the sponsor will have to be fingerprinted, figured out, and see if she's able to be released to him or her, them. This person in the prior administration would be very vulnerable if he were undocumented. So if I, unaccompanied minor, only had him as somebody to respond for me, which is an adult, but he was undocumented, the prior administration might use that information against him.
Well, worse, that person might not come forward because of fear that they'd be processed under the previous administration. That is not done anymore. People can come forward.
Right. So in this case, this person was unaccompanied or undocumented, but there isn't that fear anymore. He came up to the plate, helped this unaccompanied minor with her child, and then there's a process to reunify and make sure that this person will take care, the basic needs of this child will be met. It sounds pretty smooth, but it does take a while.
Sheriff, I'm wondering what percentage of the population that you encounter at the border are unaccompanied minors?
Oh, so in the Del Rio sector, there was a 290% increase for fiscal year 2021. There was 8,562 unaccompanied children versus 2,100 the previous year. So that's 3 times the amount of individuals that are unaccompanied children. They've had them abandoned here on the side of the river. 4-year-old that had one baby that was months old that was just left with their siblings there in the Kamala area, which is downriver from us. It was just to give you back in July, it was estimated that the cartels were making $25 million a week coming through this sector. That was what they were making coming into the Del Rio sector. That was their profit. That was estimated. But on another note, and this is why I think it's important that we need to have a system in place so we can identify who's coming in. Okay, so I'm just going to go over some numbers real quick. Back in May, there was an arrest of 2,533% increase sex offenders. Okay, 2 months later, that number went down to 1,466%. 2 months after that, the number went down to 1,314%. And then for the fiscal year, there was a 418% increase. So the numbers that go down, because in my opinion, there wasn't sufficient amount of personnel on the line to make those apprehensions. So those numbers of sex offenders that were being arrested went down. So the total number of sex offenders that were detained during the 21 fiscal year was 114 versus 22 the previous year. So, the system has to be fixed. We have to take pride in protecting our citizens. We also have to have the same amount of pride in trying to help, trying to be Christian to somebody else trying to come into this country. But as the way the system is set up, it's broke. It needs to be fixed.
Thank you, Sheriff. So, another question?
Hi, my name is Graham. I'm a first-year student at the Harris School of Public Policy. So you talked about CBP and breaking the law. I think it was 2017, WNYC did a long story about the lack of oversight, regardless of administration at CBP. Could you talk about whether there's any future where CBP doesn't act as a rogue agency and has oversight and answers to somebody in the executive branch?
I think that's for you, Tanya.
Oh, that's for me?
Either Tanya or the woman who worked in the Biden administration, either one.
Ambassador?
Roberta, Ambassador?
Well, I guess the one thing that I would say is when this administration took over, and remember, I was there for 100 days, not more than that, but they found a situation in which it was really important to reassert control over all of the agencies that make up DHS, frankly. I think, in fact, leadership was really critical, whether you're talking about Border Patrol, whether you're talking about CBP, or whether you're talking about ICE. And I think that Secretary Mayorkas and his team at DHS are really trying to do that. I would also say that in my experience traveling along the border, not just in the 100 days that I was in the Biden administration, but obviously as ambassador to Mexico and then previously as assistant secretary for the Western Hemisphere, I spent a lot of time with CBP officers, with Border Patrol officers. There are some amazing people out there doing fabulous work, but they are being asked to do too much. They're being asked to do it without resources or with the wrong resources, because frankly, I don't think deployment of the military to do back office tasks is necessarily the right answer. We also expanded Border Patrol hugely over the last few years, but we didn't expand CBP and the inspectors who do the vetting and the checking, as Sheriff Martinez was saying, to make sure we know who's coming in, nor did we necessarily give them all of the right tools or training. And I think that this is a leadership challenge to make sure the agencies are performing their functions correctly, that there's an internal ombudsman who does rapid investigations when there are abuses, because every agency has abuses and has to take action against those abuses. And many of the times I worked with my Mexican counterparts and there were abuses committed or seemed to be alleged abuses committed at the border, the response we got from our counterparts in DHS was, it's under investigation. And that answer seemed to last literally years. It's under investigation. And that's not the right answer. These things have to be done relatively rapidly so that you can ensure that the people who are doing their job properly see that those who are not are punished. That's the way you build that core of people who abide by both the law and the policy and treat people humanely and don't violate the law. But Sheriff Martinez was also getting at a really important point, which is how much money is involved in illegal crossings, whether it's people or drugs or other forms of contraband. And we've seen that can corrupt security forces on both sides of the border. And we have to make sure that we're vigilant against that. And I think the administration is committed to that with the new leadership at DHS, but it takes time.
I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions.
Hi, my name is Peter Tinty. I'm a lecturer at CIR, and I teach a course on transnational organized crime. My question is there really a migration crisis, or is there just a migration policy crisis? And I mention that because the word organized crime, for example, is doing a lot of work in this conversation.
Yeah.
But the reason organized crime is making so much money, or I should say organized criminal groups are making so much money on migrant smuggling, and even got involved in migrant smuggling in the first place when previously they hadn't been, is because it's gotten so much harder to enter the U.S. irregularly.
Yes.
So if you want to combat organized crime, if you want to reduce demand for smuggler services, you could open the border tomorrow, which of course is not a realistic policy option here. But my question again is, when we talk about solutions, well, solutions to what? And is there actually, when we consider the raw numbers of people coming, is that actually a crisis? Is that not something that could just be dealt with when irregular migrants arrive, you then process them? Or is that really just a political issue that, you know, we're here talking about technical solutions to this problem, but at the end of the day, these are political issues that governments need to decide?
I mean, that's a great question. I think what I've seen as a reporter over the last few years is just how much more intimately involved organized crime is with human smuggling, that human smuggling business. You want to take it?
Well, let me say a couple of things, and it's a great question indeed. And I think it's both. I mean, the reality is that we have policies in place that do not respond to reality. They are designed for a world which is not the world that we're living in. The reality is that there's a lot of demand for migrant workers. There's a lot of migrants who are doing really important things in all of the countries, in Mexico, in the United States. They are critical workers in many sectors, and they are having a lot of positive effects in the communities they're in. And as long as there is that demand, there is going to be people who are going to try to come to the US, to Mexico, to Canada. And if we don't have the legal pathways to have that people come here in a regular fashion, well, that's going to create this space for a migration that does not happen either orderly or safely. But there's another thing to take into account, which is also reality, which is if we don't have a realistic assessment of what are the numbers of migrants that we need, that we can take care of, that we can integrate safely to our societies, and we start having flows that are not manageable, as I was talking, for example, in the case of asylum seekers. I mean, Mexico is not prepared to deal with the amount of asylum seekers that we have right now. We can expand our system, and we're trying to do that, and we work, for example, with the UNHCR. But what happens if that number grows and grows, as we've seen in the past few years? How many migrants can we actually absorb and integrate? So I would say that it is another important question that we need to ask ourselves and to really analyze how much migrants or how many migrants we need in our societies can take care of, how many asylum seekers we can take in, how many refugee seekers. And the more truthful answers we have to these questions, the better policies we will have to respond to migration, because indeed what we have right now is not a way that is actually managing in the best way possible the situation. We are all acting around all these laws and policies that we have, and trying to do the best that we can with these realities.
Tanya.
I do want to add, and I really would like to pull a chair and sit you down up here, because that is a whole other conversation I would love to dig into. But in the case of Title 42 and in the case of migrant protection protocols, they are horrific, cruel policies that have fed into and created a whole demographic of portfolio for organized crime. They have a dollar sign on their head, and once they're expelled via flight, via land, once they're brought to the port of entry at ungodly hours because they have to be processed to enter for their court hearing at 4:30 in the morning or whatever, these are nests of operations for organized crime. So, Remain in Mexico started in January 2019 to the prior administration. It was finally suspended, terminated, whatnot. It was restarted in this administration, despite everything that they promised that they wouldn't. They did. They were forced to. I understand. Yes. However, they were forced to restart it. They were not forced to expand their applicability to all nationalities within the Western Hemisphere, other than Mexico, right? So, yes, they were forced to. They were not forced to expand. But these policies, as you mentioned, do create and feed into what already exists and creates even more havoc to vulnerable populations.
And you had metering before MPP and Title 42. You had metering way before those two.
Yeah.
But the question again is,
2016.
If those policies they respond simply to wishes of bad people who want to be in a bad situation, which I don't think it's true, or they are measures that are put in place because we don't have the tools to deal with this reality.
Ambassador, Sheriff, we have about 20 seconds. Any last words?
I would just say that one of the most important things that needs to be done as part of any effort by the U.S. administration or by Mexico is to make this a regional conversation. There are people who come from outside the Western Hemisphere as well in undocumented status, but the vast majority are from the Western Hemisphere. And we have to get back to having that regional conversation because everybody has to help on this. The U.S. government will continue to try and fix its system. It is something that has become far too polarized. The sheriff's absolutely right, and we've talked about this, and it's got to be more pragmatic. But meanwhile, the countries of the region also need to bear some responsibility for this and some responsibility for being part of the solution well beyond Central America.
Yeah.
Sheriff?
So, we're facing some unprecedented challenges as we go forward, but the right people have to be at the table to have these discussions. In reference to, the migration, in reference to border security, all the major players have to be at the table. And Ms. Jacobs is right, it has to be a regional approach that has to take place.
Yeah.
Sheriff, Ambassador, Tanya, Roberto, I want to thank you. A great discussion, a very honest, frank discussion here. And I hope to read your book someday. Thank you very much.